For more than 30 years, I lived a life defined by quiet sacrifice and relentless devotion, sacrifices no one seemed to notice, except for me, in the darkest moments. I am Margaret, a woman 55 years old, who sacrificed her own dreams and desires to hold her family together. My son and his family have been at the center of my existence, the reason I pushed through each day, even when my spirit was weary and my body ached. I remember 3 sacrifices most clearly. First, I gave up my nursing career. I had trained and worked hard, but when my son was born, I chose to stay home to care for him, full-time. It felt natural then, a mother's choice, but little by little, my ambition slipped away like sand through my fingers. Years passed, and I never returned to nursing. That career, once a symbol of my independence, was replaced by sleepless nights and endless house chores. The second sacrifice was financial. After my husband died 10 years ago, the weight of keeping our household afloat fell entirely on me. I juggled multiple jobs, working as a cashier during the day and cleaning offices at night. There was barely time to breathe, let alone rest. Most days, every cent we earned went towards bills and necessities. There was no room for extras or indulgences. I barely noticed my exhaustion because I was too busy making ends meet. Lastly, I sacrificed my relationships and social life. Long ago, I had friends I could laugh with, places I could go, moments of freedom I could claim. But those connections faded as I dedicated myself to raising my son, caring for my family, and surviving alone after my husband's death. Parties, dinners, or even simple outings became luxuries I could not afford, not in time, energy, or money. I learned to live in silence and solitude. Through all this, I normalized my suffering. It became a part of who I was. When my hands ached from work, I brushed it off. When my heart longed for companionship, I told myself it wasn't necessary. I thought my love alone justified every sacrifice and ignored all my own needs. I buried my loneliness, my weariness, and my unmet desire for appreciation beneath the weight of responsibility. I became invisible to others and to myself. Emotionally, I was starving. My soul craved acknowledgement, love, and rest. Instead, I received only expectation and more demands. The world seemed to see a dependable woman, strong and selfless. My family praised my work ethic, but rarely recognized the cost. In their eyes, I was unwavering, a pillar they leaned on. But inside, I felt hollow, as if I were fading away. Financially, life was a constant struggle. After years of careful budgeting and working multiple jobs, I had no savings, no security net. I depended heavily on my son's family to help with unexpected expenses, feeling both grateful and ashamed. There was pride in my sacrifice, but also resentment simmering beneath the surface. Though I never voiced it, I was tethered to their support, yet made invisible by it. 2 moments in particular are etched deep in my memory. One was my son's graduation day. I stood quietly in the back, pushing down the urge to cry, as proud families celebrated their children's successes. I declined the invitation to the after-party, feigning tiredness, though what stung most was feeling unseen among so much joy. The second was my son's wedding. I worked behind the scenes, arranging decorations and cleaning up, while his young bride basked in attention. I smiled through it all. But the sting of invisibility was sharp. My home is a testament to my years of giving, without receiving. The furniture is worn, the curtains threadbare, the walls faded. Dust lingers where I've no energy to clean thoroughly. Photos of family moments cover the walls, some bright and joyful, others tinged with the heaviness I feel inside. The kitchen counters hold the marks of daily use and neglect. This small apartment is both sanctuary and cage, a place filled with memories of sacrifice but little comfort for my own soul. In this environment, surrounded by tangible reminders of my diminished self, I live each day trying to find meaning. I cook meals for those I love, clean, run errands, and keep my family's world turning. Yet a question haunts me. Where is the place for me in all of this? Am I just a shadow behind their happiness? A dead weight they don't acknowledge? I have told myself for years that this is just motherhood, just what life demands. But deep down, I know I have lost parts of myself along the way, parts that long to breathe, to be seen, To be loved for who I am beyond sacrifice. This is my life so far, one of silent labor and fading dreams, of love mixed with loneliness. And though I have lived it out of duty, there is a small stirring part of me that wonders if it can be different, if I can be more than just the woman who gives and fades away. Somewhere buried beneath years of quiet endurance, a flame of hope still flickers, waiting to be ignited. The evening of my son's birthday was supposed to be a celebration, a moment of joy and family coming together. Instead, it became a night of humiliation that shook me to my core. We gathered in their spacious living room, filled with warm light from the chandelier and soft flickers of candles lining the shelves. The smell of cinnamon and roasted meat mingled with faint scents of fresh flowers in vases scattered about. The sounds of laughter, clinking glasses, and cheerful chatter enveloped the space, setting a festive tone on the surface. But underneath, I was slowly slipping into a silence that felt like sinking in quicksand. I arrived early, wanting to help. I set the table carefully, straightened the cushions on the couch, and arranged the gifts on a sideboard. I even baked a chocolate cake, hoping to contribute something special. Throughout the evening, I smiled and nodded, trying to join in conversations, but felt a growing wall between me and everyone else. Emily, my daughter-in-law, moved through the room with practiced ease, her voice light but cutting beneath the politeness. I noticed the subtle glances exchanged, the small shifts in posture when I spoke up. They framed me as a guest who was getting in the way, a presence to be tolerated rather than embraced. The first signs came when I reached for the credit card on the coffee table. It was a card I had given them years before when they needed help, something I never questioned. Using that card had been a silent pact between us, a way to support them when times were hard. But that night, as I picked it up, Emily's voice suddenly sliced through the hum of conversation like a cold blade. "You need to stop being dead weight, Mom," she said with unmistakable venom. The laughter around the room stopped abruptly. Heads turned toward me, eyes flickering between shock, embarrassment, and for some, sly amusement. The weight of those words crushed me instantly. My hands trembled so much that the card slipped and hit the floor with a loud clatter. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the tick of a nearby clock and the uneasy rustling of chairs. My heart pounded fiercely, threatening to burst from my chest as nausea swept over me in waves. I felt exposed, naked under their judgment. Thoughts raced through my mind. How could she say that? After all these years? After everything I've done? Was I really just dead weight? Was I invisible? Useless? My body betrayed me. Cold sweat dampened my back and palms. The room swam slightly, and my legs felt unsteady. I forced a tight smile, desperate to hide my disgrace. But every breath felt heavy, labored, as if the air itself was thick with shame. No one came to defend me. My son looked away, his face tight with discomfort but silent. My daughter-in-law's lips curled into a faint, victorious smirk. I caught glimpses of others shifting awkwardly in their seats, avoiding eye contact. Only my granddaughter, a quiet girl of 9, reached out and gently took my hand, offering a small anchor in the sea of rejection. The squeeze was soft, but full of understanding, a secret shared between us. Emily's voice cut in again. "I'm sick of paying for everything. Use your own money from now on," she said, tone sharp and commanding. It was the final blow, a public declaration that I was a burden, unwanted, and to be cut loose. I felt the very ground shift beneath me. I tried to steady myself, but the tears burned behind my eyes, held back only by a fragile wall of pride and pain. The energy in the room shifted back into festive mode. But for me, the moment had turned cold and empty. 3 moments that night echoed painfully in my mind. The first was Emily brushing off my offer to help refill her glass. Her curt reply, "I can manage, thank you." The second was my son's whispered excuse when I tried to explain her behavior. "She's just stressed, Mom. Don't make a scene." And the third was a cousin's quiet, cruel murmur as I passed by. Some people just suck the life out of everyone. The contrast between the room's warm celebration and the cold isolation I felt was overwhelming. Laughter and music surged around me like waves, but I was stranded, a lone island swallowed by a sea of indifference and disdain. Every smile directed elsewhere, every conversation that excluded me, Every subtle jab chipped away at years of held-in pain. I realized then that all my sacrifice, all my efforts to hold us together, had not bought me respect or gratitude, only invisibility and contempt. I left the party early, swallowing the lump in my throat, my footsteps slow and heavy on the cold pavement outside. The night air was sharp against my flushed cheeks, and I breathed deep, trying to steady myself against the storm inside. The event was a painful reckoning. The silent acceptance of my erasure by those I loved most was the deepest wound of all. No longer could I ignore the truth that had silently crept into my life. I had been reduced to a burden, a dead weight in my own family's eyes. That night, humiliation was no longer a quiet shadow lurking in the background. It was a loud, searing presence that demanded acknowledgement. I returned home, alone with my thoughts, the echoes of laughter still ringing hollow in my ears. This night marked a painful fracture. The moment I could no longer pretend that my sacrifice had been anything but invisible and unappreciated. The moment I closed the door behind me that night, the weight of what had just happened pressed down on me like an iron shroud. The sounds from the party faded away, replaced by a suffocating silence. I sank onto the threadbare couch, the familiar creak beneath me feeling both comforting and cruel. A reminder of the years spent in this small apartment, bearing burdens no one saw. But tonight, the ache inside me was different. It was sharp, urgent, demanding attention. Her words echoed relentlessly in my mind. Dead weight. Those two brutal syllables tore through the veneer of my long-suffering acceptance and exposed a raw, painful truth I had tried to deny. For decades, I had devoted every fiber of my being to my family, giving up my career, working multiple jobs, sacrificing friendships and personal happiness. I had convinced myself that pain was normal, that neglect was part of love. But now, it hit me with crushing clarity. I had been diminished, dismissed, reduced to a burden by the people I loved most. As the room spun slightly from the flood of emotions, shame, anger, disbelief, I pressed my fingers against my temples, trying to steady the storm inside. My breath came in short bursts. My heart pounded so fiercely, it felt like my ribs could shatter. The humiliation was palpable, but beneath it simmered something stronger, a fierce, burning awareness that I could no longer continue like this. In that quiet, dimly lit room, I touched the silver pendant resting on my chest, the small, heart-shaped locket my late husband had given me years ago. It was a symbol of love and loyalty, a memory of the person I once was before the years of sacrifice left me hollow. The pendant felt heavy, as if weighed down by all the sacrifices I had shouldered alone. For a moment I saw it not as a talisman of devotion, but as chains binding me to a life I no longer recognized. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and revisited memories I had long buried in the soft folds of time. The nights I stayed awake nursing my sick son, the holidays that felt lonelier than solitude, the countless times I swallowed my words to keep the peace. What had once felt like acts of love now felt like fragments of a life stolen from me. I understood painfully that I had accepted my own invisibility, that I had become the shadow in my own story. A surge of clarity washed over me, sharp and invigorating. I knew that to survive, I had to break free from this pattern, the endless cycle of giving without receiving, of being pushed aside. My thoughts grew purposeful. I deserved respect. I deserved recognition. I deserved to reclaim my story. The realization was not accompanied by anger or rebellion. It was calm, but resolute, a seed of determination planted deep within my soul. I rose from the couch and walked slowly to the kitchen, each step solid and deliberate. The linoleum floor was cold beneath my feet, grounding me in the present moment. I opened the drawer where I kept the credit card, the same one Emily had slammed onto the table with disdain moments before. For years, that card had been a lifeline for them when money was tight, a small sacrifice on my part. But now, holding it felt like grasping a symbol of all that I had silently endured. The card slipped between my fingers as I placed it on the kitchen counter, its plastic surface gleaming under the dim overhead light. It was more than a card. It was a representation of the invisible chains I had allowed to wrap around me. I sat down at the worn kitchen table staring at the card with new eyes. No longer would I let it define my worth or be used to diminish me. My mind replayed the events of the evening, but with each memory, the pain shifted into resolve. I thought back to my son's graduation day, when I had stood unnoticed in the hallway as others celebrated, to the wedding where I was reduced to background noise. Those moments were no longer silent sacrifices, but clear boundaries crossed. My compliance had been mistaken for weakness, my silence for consent. Outside, the night was calm. The streetlights flickered uncertainly, their glow dim against the dark sky. The distant hum of the city was softened by the late hour. Yet inside me, a quiet revolution was stirring, a steady flame ignited by newfound clarity and hope. My breathing slowed and deepened. The unbearable weight pressing on my chest began to lift, just enough to let in a spark of light. I whispered to myself, I matter. I am not invisible. I deserve to be heard. That night marked the beginning, not of a rescue mission from others, but of a personal awakening, a quiet but powerful decision to no longer accept invisibility or devaluation. The journey ahead would be long and uncertain, but the first step was taken, a refusal to remain dead weight. I tucked the credit card into the back of a drawer, symbolically closing that chapter. The woman who had endured years of invisibility was still there, but she was no longer in control. A new version of me was awakening, ready to reclaim space, breath, and life. The following weeks after that night were unlike any I'd ever experienced. The internal shift I felt began to show itself outwardly, a new strength quietly taking root. I knew I had to act, to rewrite the script that had so long cast me as the background figure, the invisible provider. My first act of defiance was simple yet profound in its meaning. I decided to cancel the credit card I had once handed over to my son and his wife. It was a gesture I had made out of love and trust, a way to help without asking for recognition or repayment. But tonight it felt like the last chain that tied me to a role I no longer accepted. After work one day, I sat at my kitchen table, the plastic card illuminated by the soft glow of the overhead light. It seemed too ordinary to carry the storm of emotions within me. Yet, in that moment, it symbolized all the sacrifices I had made and the invisibility I had endured. I took a deep breath, feeling the knot of years unraveling slowly in my chest. With steady hands, I called the bank and explained my decision. The representative's voice was polite but detached, unaware of the significance this held for me. When the cancellation was confirmed, I exhaled deeply, a tiny victory that felt as vast as an ocean. Then came the hardest part, informing my son and Emily. I watched their faces carefully as I told them the card was no longer available. Their reactions were a mixture of stunned silence and disbelief. Emily's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a tight line. My son looked conflicted, caught between loyalty and surprise. "I'm sorry," I said calmly, meeting their gazes with quiet determination. "You will have to buy with your own money from now on." There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, only a tense pause as the weight of my words settled in the room. For the first time, I did not apologize or explain. I simply stated my boundary, clear and unyielding. The air between us shifted. Emily's scoff was barely concealed. "You're making a mistake," she said, but there was no threat in her voice, only disbelief. My son remained silent, eyes downcast, as if weighing the repercussions of this change. My body felt lighter as I stood my ground. The familiar tremor of doubt fluttered inside me, but was quickly quashed by a surging pride. I was no longer the silent enabler of disrespect. This quiet act of defiance was my first step toward reclaiming myself. Over the next few days, a subtle war unfolded, not loud or confrontational, but a battle of wills and boundaries. Phone calls came, messages pinged in the dead of night, pleas, accusations, attempts to guilt me into reconsidering. "How could you do this to us?" Emily's voice was sharp and icy in a text. "Are you really going to let us suffer because of this?" my son asked in a shaky voicemail. I resisted. I did not reply immediately, letting the messages sit unanswered as I fortified my resolve. One rainy morning, as I sorted laundry, my phone buzzed again. It was Emily. I let the call go to voicemail. The persistent ringing seemed determined to break through the barrier I was erecting. Later, I listened to her voice pleading for understanding, her words filled with frustration and blame. But I had made my decision. The pressures were immense. Family members started to take sides, some sympathizing, others disapproving of my choice. The isolation that followed was painful. I found myself sitting alone in the quiet of my apartment, questioning if I was doing the right thing. Doubt crept in, whispering fears of loneliness and failure. The ache of rejection matched the sting of humiliation from not long ago. One afternoon, a close friend who had always supported me visited. She sat quietly beside me, her presence a balm on raw nerves. "You have every right to stand up for yourself," she said gently. "You've carried so much for so long. It's okay to take care of you now." Her words were a lifeline. They anchored me in my conviction and gave me the courage to keep moving forward against the tide. Amidst the tension, I began setting new boundaries. I refused to answer calls immediately, allowed myself space to breathe, and prioritized my own needs without guilt. I started small, going for walks alone, visiting a local library, revisiting neglected hobbies. Each act was a brick in the foundation of my new self, yet not all battles were external. An unexpected confrontation arose with someone I once considered an ally, my sister. She approached me one evening in a huff, disappointed and confused. "Why are you pushing them away? Family is everything. You're risking everything for pride." Her words cut deep, because they echoed doubts I had wrestled with internally. I explained as calmly as I could that respect and kindness mattered just as much as familial bonds, that staying silent and invisible was a price too high to pay. The tension between us simmered but could not smother the truth I was finally embracing. As the days stretched on, the hard work of change settled into a new rhythm. I was no longer just surviving. I was actively choosing to thrive. The battles at first were exhausting, but with each boundary maintained, my strength grew. That quiet victory, the canceling of that card and the assertion of my worth, was more than a practical decision. It was the first real, tangible step in breaking free from the pattern that had bound me for decades. Though the road ahead was uncertain and fraught with challenges, I stood taller, lighter, and more truly myself than I had in years. No one applauded, no celebrations marked the moment, but within me, a victory flourished, a testament to the power of calm, steadfast resolve and the beginning of my rebirth. After canceling the card and telling my son and Emily they'd have to buy with their own money from now on, I was met with a reaction I had braced myself for, but hoped wouldn't be so relentless. What followed was a gradual but fierce attempt to pull me back into the role I had long inhabited, the silent, invisible caregiver whose sacrifices were taken for granted, whose presence was expected but rarely acknowledged. Instead of calm acceptance, my decision sparked a cascade of emotional maneuvering, guilt trips, and social pressure that threatened to break me, but also steeled my resolve. Almost immediately, the phone calls began. Emily's voice was sharp, dripping with contempt and disbelief when she first confronted me. "Do you realize how selfish you're being?" she snapped over the line one afternoon. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" She accused me of betrayal, of being ungrateful to the family that had supported me for so long. I listened quietly, holding the phone tight in my hands to steady the tremble inside. When she finished, I replied calmly, refusing to justify or explain more than I needed. I set a boundary. I'm standing by it. That simple truth felt like a rock thrown into a stormy sea, seemingly small but powerful enough to ripple through our fractured relationship. My son's calls were more complex, torn between loyalty to his wife and love for his mother. His voice was filled with confusion and pain. "Mom, please, we need to find some way back from this," he said, pleading. "This isn't just about money, is it? Let's talk it through." I wanted to explain that my choice was about respect and self-worth after years of invisibility, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I told him firmly, "I want peace, but it must be built on respect. I can't keep being taken for granted." His silence afterward weighed heavily on me, a reminder that my actions had created distance, but also that my boundaries were necessary. As word traveled, the ripple effect grew. Family members who once admired my endurance suddenly saw me as the problem, the source of discord. Messages and visits came from well-meaning cousins and siblings, urging me to think of the family and make peace. One cousin called, her voice thin with concern. "Margaret, Family is about sticking together, even if it means putting some things aside. Maybe it's time to let go of your pride, the pressure to conform to the old script, the script where mothers and grandmothers sacrifice endlessly without complaint, closed in on me like a tightening coil. I began to feel the sharp edges of isolation. At family dinners, conversations turned away from me. At gatherings, looks were cast in silence. Whispers of selfishness and ingratitude floated just below the surface, unspoken, yet palpable. I found myself retreating more and more into the safety of my apartment, struggling against loneliness that sometimes felt overwhelming. Yet, the memory of being called dead weight propelled me forward, reminding me that self-respect was not selfish. One day, a longtime family friend visited, her tone both kind and sad. "Margaret," she said gently, "sometimes the price of peace is compromise. Maybe it's time to soften, to remember that family love means sacrifices. Not all battles are worth fighting." Her words stung because I realized this peace she described was the submission I was determined to escape. I thanked her, but my resolve only hardened. Even amidst external pressures, the internal struggle surprised me. Saying no was a radical act, and I had to practice often. I declined invitations with a quiet firmness that surprised those around me. I stopped reacting immediately to messages, giving myself space to breathe and think. Each step was small but significant, a brick in the foundation of a new life, marked by boundaries and self-care. Emily's calls and texts repeated like a broken record, pleas mixed with accusations, attempts to twist my kindness into weakness. "You're destroying this family," one message read. "I'm trying to be patient, but how can you be so cold?" another pleaded. I resisted responding, knowing silence was the best defense against emotional manipulation. Then one chilly evening came a knock on my door. It was Emily. Her face was hard, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion and frustration. "Margaret, please, can we just talk? For the family?" she asked softly. I told her gently but firmly that I wasn't ready and that I needed time. She lingered a moment, disappointment heavy in her gaze, then left without another word, the finality of the moment settling between us. The solitude became a double-edged sword. It was both a refuge and a source of deep loneliness. Some nights I sat quietly, wrapped in a blanket, silenced by doubt. Was I right to stand firm? Was I harming those I loved most? Questions plagued me, yet I clung to the truth of my worth. Gradually, I began to rebuild a life with clearer boundaries. I stopped offering help without being asked. I limited my availability without guilt. I carved out time for myself, to breathe, to rest, to dream again. Each act of self-care was a rebellion against decades of neglect. The hardest challenge came unexpectedly, from my sister, once a close ally. She visited, anger and confusion in her eyes. "Why are you pushing everyone away, Margaret? You're tearing the family apart over pride," she said harshly. We talked long into the evening. I told her that respect was the foundation of love and that I refused to be invisible any longer. Our relationship didn't mend immediately, but the conversation was a breakthrough I didn't expect. During this time, I reached out to old friends I had drifted from. Their warmth reminded me I was more than a caregiver or a shadow. They valued me for who I was, a woman reclaiming her life, with every firm no, every silent refusal of guilt. I reclaimed a piece of myself. Independence revealed itself not just in money but in voice, time, and dignity. The road ahead was uncertain and sometimes lonely, but I moved forward with steadiness and courage. Some days the silence and distance felt like punishment, but I reminded myself why I took this path, to no longer be dead weight, but to stand in my own light, to live fully and freely. This was no longer about sacrifice for others. It was about honoring myself, finally, fully, unapologetically. Several weeks into my new journey of standing firm, something unexpected happened. A truth buried deep within my family's past was unearthed, shaking the very foundations of everything I thought I knew. It was a discovery so profound that it reframed my entire story, gave context to decades of sacrifice, and transformed my pain into a different kind of strength. It began with a dusty, forgotten box tucked away in the back of a closet, a box I stumbled upon while cleaning. I was sorting through old photographs and letters intending to make some space when a folded envelope slipped out and landed at my feet. It bore no name, no date, just my handwriting from long ago. My curiosity, tinged with a cautious hope, compelled me to open it. Inside was a stack of letters between my late husband and his eldest brother, letters I had never seen before. As I read through them, the tone shifted from mundane exchanges to quiet, painful revelations. The correspondence spoke of financial struggles hidden from me, strained family relations, and most shockingly, an agreement made without my knowledge that reshaped my husband's choices and subsequently my life. The letters revealed that my husband had been forced to prioritize care for his brother over his own family's well-being. For years, he quietly supported a failing family business and dealt with debts his brother accumulated. This secret burden explained why, even in better times, money was always tight and opportunities were sacrificed. More than that, it explained the silent sacrifices he asked of me and why my efforts to sustain our family seemed never quite enough. A mix of emotions surged through me: anger, betrayal, sadness, but also surprising relief. The financial strain and emotional neglect I felt were not just random hardships, but part of a hidden story in which I had played a supporting role without knowing all the facts. Suddenly, years of struggle were no longer just my burden. They were entwined in a family history filled with sacrifice and secrecy. But beyond the practical revelations lay deeper wounds. The letters hinted at long-standing resentments and betrayals within the family, which had been carefully concealed to protect me. I was both heartbroken and furious to realize how much had been kept from me, how much I had unknowingly endured without the full picture. As I reread one letter filled with my husband's quiet despair and sense of duty, my whole life took on new shades of meaning. A flood of memories that once seemed isolated gained weight and context. The late nights working double shifts to make up for money lost, the times my husband looked tired and defeated but said nothing, now made sense in a raw, painful way. One particular letter spoke of a promise made years ago to shoulder burdens privately and shield the family from scandal or shame. It was a promise that had cost us dearly, placing me at the center of sacrifices and silence, and him at the weight of impossible expectations. With this revelation came a complex mixture of feelings: rawness, grief, and a quiet understanding that tempered my anger. There was no easy forgiveness or immediate relief, but an expanded awareness of how intertwined love, sacrifice, and secrecy can be. The discovery shifted my perspective on why I had been treated the way I was. The dismissiveness I had suffered from some family members was not just personal cruelty, but a reflection of tangled loyalties and old wounds. My place in that story was far more complicated than I had realized. This truth, though painful, was strangely liberating. It erased some of the self-blame I had carried for years and allowed me to see myself not as a failed martyr, but as a woman caught in a complex web of loyalty and sacrifice. The revelation became a turning point, a moment to decide how I would carry this history into my future. Physically, I felt drained when I finished reading, my hands trembling, a heaviness pressing on my chest, but also lighter, as if unburdened by the sheer weight of hidden truths. The apartment felt different too, quieter, more filled with past echoes now spoken aloud. I sat alone for hours afterward, reflecting on everything with a new lens. The memories of hurt began to shift into a clearer narrative, one that acknowledged limitations, pain, but also resilience. I allowed myself to mourn the innocence lost and the betrayals endured, but also to honor the strength I had summoned unknowingly. The knowledge gave me permission to separate my worth from the shadows cast by secrecy and neglect. It was as if I finally understood why the roles I was assigned felt so suffocating. They were not mine alone, but inherited from a tangled family past. From this moment of clarity, I began to formulate a plan, not of revenge or recrimination, but of healing and boundary setting that took into account the full complexity of my past. The newfound understanding infused me with a resolve to reclaim my life with compassion, but also firm resolve. I realized that this revelation did not chain me to the past, but paradoxically freed me from blame and shame, freed me from the silence that had covered years of unseen pain. I was no longer a passive recipient of my history, but an active interpreter and agent of change. As I folded the letters carefully back into the envelope, I acknowledged the depth of what I had uncovered. It was a secret that explained much and yet demanded new choices. I would carry this truth with me, not as a burden, but as a compass. That night, the silence in my apartment was no longer oppressive. It carried the weight of past sorrows, but also the light of new understanding. As I prepared for sleep, a tentative peace settled over me, signaling a shift from confusion to clarity, from suffering to strength. In those quiet hours, I decided what to do next, to face my family with honesty when I was ready, to draw firmer boundaries empowered by knowledge, and to continue building a life where my worth was no longer tied to old secrets or sacrifices demanded in silence. This moment, this revelation, was not an end, but a new beginning, a powerful gateway to liberation, self-respect, and a future of my own making. The day I decided to confront Emily was the day everything changed. I spent the morning preparing, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally, readying myself to face the woman who had called me dead weight, whose words had shattered years of silent endurance. This confrontation wasn't about reconciliation or forgiveness. It was about speaking my truth boldly, standing in the full weight of my worth, and severing the final chains that had kept me bound. I chose to meet her at the small cafe close to my apartment, a neutral ground where words could be spoken, without the watchful eyes of family and the weight of silence that often accompanied us in the home. The air was cool and crisp as I stepped out into the morning, carrying with me a quiet resolve that steadied my trembling hands. The cafe was filled with the gentle hum of morning chatter, the aroma of fresh coffee filling the space. Sunlight filtered through slightly fogged windows, casting soft light on the worn wooden tables. The familiar warmth was a sharp contrast to the turmoil brewing inside me. Emily was already seated, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her posture defensive and wary. When I approached, her eyes flicked up, momentarily revealing surprise before shifting to guardedness. I took a deep breath, sat down, and looked directly into her eyes without flinching. "I'm here to speak my truth," I said firmly, voice steady, though low. No apologies, no begging, just honesty. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she listened, but she said nothing, signaling for me to continue. "For years I've carried the weight of sacrifices no one acknowledged," I began. "I left my career, took on multiple jobs, gave up friendships and possibilities, all for this family. And yet, the moment I set a boundary, I was called dead weight." My voice trembled slightly, the sting of those words rising up once more, but matched by a steel I didn't know I possessed. That phrase, those words, they defined me for so long, but I refused to carry that identity any longer. Emily's eyes flickered with a mixture of anger, discomfort, and perhaps begrudging respect. "You don't understand," she replied finally, her voice tighter than I expected. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "No," I answered sharply. "I understand too well. I've lived it. Your disdain is not about me. It's about fear, control, and denial. I've spent decades sacrificing, hoping to be loved without conditions. But love isn't silence and submission." I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. "It's respect, and now I demand it, not for you to give me, but for myself to claim." She shifted uncomfortably. For a moment, the air between us held a tense quiet. Then she said, "Maybe you never really understood your place, Margaret." I smiled bitterly, a flash of old pain meeting new strength. "That's where we differ," I replied. "I am not a shadow in anyone's story. I am the author of my own life now." We spoke in short, sharp exchanges. Words laden with years of unsaid feelings and half-truths stopped finally on the table. When she threatened to pull my son away from me, I stood firm, saying, "You will not use him as a weapon. Not anymore." The confrontation lasted hours, not in explosive emotion, but in steady, deliberate truth. Each word I uttered was a breaking of old chains, each refusal to back down a step toward freedom. Emily tried to regain control, her voice rising in moments, but I met it with calm resolve. Her barbs bounced off the new walls I was building around my self-worth. At one point, I looked at her and said clearly, "You called me dead weight. Today I stand here heavier, only because I carry my own worth, not because I am burdened by the expectations of others." She opened her mouth to retort, then closed it. The shift was palpable. This woman who once wielded control like a weapon found her dominion slipping through her fingers. When our conversation finally ended, neither victorious but changed, I stood up without looking back. The cafe, once a place of anxiety, now felt charged with possibility. The weight of years spent bending and breaking lifted a fraction with each step I took away from the table. Outside, the sun shone brighter than it had all morning. The cold air filled my lungs, and I breathed deeply, tasting freedom on the breeze. The confrontation was not the end of the journey, but a powerful rupture, a reclaiming of voice and dignity. I had spoken without apology, without seeking approval or forgiveness. It was an act of courage, clarity, and final assertion. In that moment, the woman who had been silenced, sidelined, and branded dead weight became undeniably present, not a victim, but a survivor, a woman who refused to disappear. The path ahead would still hold challenges, but the hardest battle, speaking out and standing firm, was won. The chains were broken, and I was free to build a life defined on my terms, illuminated by my own light. Leaving Emily behind in the cafe, I stepped forward into the day, a new beginning marked by strength, dignity, and self-determination. The days that followed my confrontation with Emily marked the beginning of a profound transformation, a new phase where I began to reclaim not only my dignity, but also my life. I resolved to create a space for myself, both literally and figuratively, where I could nurture the woman I had long neglected. With intention, I cleared a small corner of my apartment, removing old clutter and opening space for light to come in. I placed there a simple wooden table, a soft chair, and a small shelf with books and mementos that spoke to my evolving journey. Each morning I sat quietly in this space, allowing myself a ritual of reflection and renewal. Lighting a candle became a symbol of the light I was inviting into my life, a beacon against the years of shadow. I breathed deeply, grounding myself in the present moment, and spoke gentle affirmations aloud. I am worthy of love and respect. I am enough exactly as I am. These words, simple yet potent, anchored me when doubts arose and served as reminders that my value was intrinsic. Outside this personal sanctuary, I began to nurture new relationships. I reconnected with an old friend, Emma, who became a steady source of companionship and understanding. Together we enjoyed quiet afternoons discussing books, life, and dreams I had once set aside. I also became acquainted with Marcus, a neighbor who invited me to morning walks in the nearby park. His kindness and calm presence helped me rediscover the pleasure of shared moments without obligation or judgment. As I engaged with these new connections, the simple pleasures of daily life took on renewed significance. The aroma of fresh coffee became a morning ritual of comfort, rather than routine. The sound of children playing outside, once a reminder of what I'd missed, now felt like music, welcoming me back to life. Colors seemed more vivid. The sunlight that filtered through my curtains felt warmer, bathing my apartment in golden hues. In quiet moments of reflection, I allowed myself to revisit the past, not with bitterness, but with acceptance. I honored the sacrifices I had made and acknowledged the pain endured, but I also recognized my strength. Those years were now chapters in a story of resilience rather than victimhood. This shift in perspective was healing in itself. One afternoon, Emma came by with a bouquet of wildflowers, fresh and vibrant. She smiled warmly and said, "There's a light in you now, Margaret. It shines in your eyes and your smile." Her words brought tears, but they were tears of gratitude and recognition. That light, once dimmed by years of neglect and doubt, was now vibrant and growing stronger each day. Standing by the window, gazing at the horizon beyond the city rooftops, I felt a deep sense of peace. The future stretched out before me, unknown and wide, filled with possibilities. Taking a slow, full breath, I whispered to myself, "I am here. This is my life and I choose it." The journey ahead remains uncertain, but the foundation I have built, of self-worth, boundaries, and authentic connection, is solid. I carry with me the lessons of the past, the courage of the present, and the hope of a future defined by freedom. No longer invisible, no longer dead weight, I am a woman reclaiming her power and her joy, ready to walk her own path with strength and grace. And this is just the beginning.